big news has just broken in Australia,
Yes.
and I wanted to dragoon you into talking about it on Substack Live so that we can be somewhat responsive to what's actually happening, which is that I think it's the longest-standing political coalition in the world.
Absolutely.
Has just fallen apart.
It has.
In Australia, which is the conservative side of politics in Australia, if people are watching this from the States, is dominated by two parties who have always functioned essentially as a single party, because there's an unbroken coalition between them. There's the country regional party called the Nationals, and then there's the more urbane and sort of conventional centre-right party, the Liberals. And the Nationals have just walked.
Yes. So they have failed to renegotiate the coalition agreement with the Liberal Party, which is what they do after every election. Australia is really unusual in having these long inter-election coalitions. It's quite normal in many multi-party countries for coalitions to form after elections in order to form government. But having these permanent coalitions in opposition is really unusual. And there's no real reason for it, other than that because of Australia's unique electoral system, these parties want to avoid three-cornered electoral contests. Now, there actually have been a couple of times when the coalition has broken before. And once was after the 1972 election, which was the first time the coalition had lost power in 16 years. But they were back together again before the 1974 election. My prediction would be they will be back together again before the 2028 election, but it might be good for them to have a bit of time apart, because the Liberals in particular are really struggling with their identity at the moment. They're struggling to win back metropolitan voters. So if the Liberals on a recount somehow manage to pull out the seat of Bradfield in Sydney, that will give them 5 seats in the whole of Sydney. And that will be equal to all of their other seats in every other capital city in Australia. 2 in Brisbane, 2 in Melbourne, 1 in Perth. Right?
Amazing.
So they've been decimated in the cities. And it's often said Labor can't win government without regional seats. Labor's got about 17 regional seats at the moment. The Liberals are barely a party without metropolitan seats. So they need to find some way of getting those back. And it's going to be very hard with a national party that is still committed to a lot of the things that are seen as being losing factors in the cities for the Liberal Party.
So the context for this is that the coalition, the centre-right coalition, primarily the Liberal Party itself, was annihilated at the last election and annihilated at the election before that, and now has such a terrifyingly tiny minority that it is an embarrassment to be in coalition with.
Yeah.
But why remove yourself from the coalition if you're the Nationals? As you said, we have a funny and I think good voting system, which is a rank choice voting system, which we call preferential voting. Americans call it rank choice. So you would normally expect that if there were let's suppose the coalition is out, right? There's no coalition.
Yep.
You've got a 3-way race, Liberals, Nationals and Labor, and whoever else wants to run. Wouldn't you expect that the Nationals and the Liberals would still be preferencing each other, because they're still closer than they are to anybody else? So what difference does it make whether they're in coalition or not?
I would expect that, and I expect they'll be back in a formal coalition. They just want to avoid any contests in rural seats where it's not clear who's going to end up on who's going to end up on first preferences. They can avoid 3-cornered contests. They sort of have their turf marked out. That's one of the purposes of the coalition agreement. As you say, in most of those contests, a coalition member is going to win, but they want to have some certainty before the election.
Right. So, I mean, I'm a bit lost when this news came through this afternoon, because I thought there are a couple of possible things that are going on. This may just be part of the negotiations.
Maybe.
And so in 36 hours, they may be back together again. This may just be a bluff, essentially, by the Nationals. On the other hand, it could be that, one possibility, which is very unlikely, is that they actually want to break up forever and the Nationals want to form an identity as a minority party and be free to do whatever they want to outside of a coalition, in which case it's going to be very difficult for the Liberal Party to get enough votes that it will be a viable opposition party, and that would truly be a massive, massive shift in Australian politics for the long term. But then the third option is it's a little bit of both in the sense that the Nationals are being canny and they see an opportunity when their coalition partner is down on its knees to get exactly what they want and to play as hardball as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And they're ready to make the Liberals do whatever the Nationals want them to do.
Yeah, well, especially since the Nationals actually held their ground at the last election. They didn't, well, they might have lost one seat due to a defecting national member. But compared to the absolute wipeout of the Liberal Party, yes, the Nationals are actually in a stronger position at the moment. One of the things that I'm really unclear on is the status of the LNP in Queensland. So in Queensland, the Liberal and National parties actually merged to form the Liberal National Party. But at the federal level, the 14 LNP MPs decide who they caucus with, whether it's the Liberal Party or the National Party. So Peter Dutton caucused with the Liberal Party, Matt Canavan caucuses with the National Party. They're both members of the LNP. I'm actually not sure what happens to that arrangement, whether the LNP stays in place in Queensland. If you to break the former coalition down, and by the way, on the Wikipedia page for the coalition, it now says it was an alliance.
I mean, that is
very quick, those Wikipedia editors. Because if you break it down, the LNP is actually the biggest bloc within the coalition because they've got those 14 Queensland seats. I think the
biggest single bloc. It's a plurality, but it's not a majority.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what happens there. I think that the coalition is not going to split up permanently. I think eventually...
Do you understand what the negotiate... I mean, are you in the weeds about what they're disagreeing about? I don't even know what they negotiate.
I don't know if it's nuclear power, although it was widely believed that because Suzanne Ley had chosen Ted O'Brien, who was the engineer of the nuclear policy from Queensland, as a deputy, then that would save it. But
she's the new leader of the opposition, the leader of the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party went into the last election making a big hoo-ha about they wanted Australia to embrace nuclear power, and so now they don't yet have a new policy as to whether they're going to keep that policy or ditch it. The Nationals are in support of a transition to nuclear. So I guess maybe they're saying that the Liberals have to keep their support of nuclear.
Maybe they do. I think we'll have to wait for the reporting to
the
come
forensic
out.
Analysis.
Yeah, I suspect we will see the BMW Bunyip marriage back together again. Before the next election. I do have a funny story, though, about the last time the coalition split.
Please.
It was 4 months in 1987 where Sir Joe Bjorkley-Peterson, the long-serving Premier of Queensland, got it into his head that
and just to clarify, he was a fairly authoritarian and corrupt individual.
He was a fairly authoritarian and corrupt individual. He was there for a long time as well. And the National Party in Queensland would frequently come third, but still manage to form government because of how badly the state was gerrymandered. Anyway, he got it into his head that he could actually run for Prime Minister, that he could take all of these National Party MPs out of the coalition and form his own party that could challenge both John Howard and Bob Hawke.
Joe for PM. This has become legendary.
Yeah, so this was encouraged by a bunch of equally delusional Gold Coast businessmen who became known as the White Shoe Brigade. I think there were some mischief-making Liberals as well, like Andrew Peacock and Robin Gray, who was the Premier of Tasmania, who were kind of nudging this along because they wanted to get rid of Howard. Anyway, it was an absolute debacle from start to finish. The greatest moment of this was when Bob Hawke called the election. Sir Joe Bjorkley-Peterson wasn't even in the country and hadn't even formed a party. He was on holiday in Disneyland. His supporters were left trying to form this new party, and then they realised that they couldn't. That collapsed. But that was the last time that the coalition broke. But they came back together in 1987. In 1987, there were more serious discussions about whether they should actually merge just to form one party. But they've always really resisted that because in the end, they do represent different sections of the population.
But, I mean, so do lots of parties represent different things.
Yes,
the Republican Party in the United States, as we will talk about on the podcast in a moment, represents a whole bunch of different constituencies and has had a big tilt over the past 10 years from from being controlled by one, the urbane cosmopolitan Mitt Romney, Brent Scowcroft wing of the party to the MAGA Trump wing. And indeed, the Labor Party also has always had this tension between blue-collar unionists and, cosmopolitan latte-swilling, Chardonnay-sipping, university-educated elitists.
That's
like
right,
us.
yes.
Yes, all right. Then the final conclusion is big news, but we don't know how big yet, and probably not enduring news for the long term.
Probably not. And it doesn't really matter that much when they're in opposition anyway.
Right.
I mean, they will probably vote together in Parliament in opposition to things that Labor's doing.
Except insofar as if the Nationals remain outside of the coalition, then they can continue bullying the Liberal Party into voting, carrying to the next election the things that they want them to.
They can. David Littleproud is really in a position to get his inner bully on.
Okay.
Let's see if he does.
All right.